This podcast is coming to you on MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. There's another show on MPM you might enjoy as well. I'm Gordon Glenister and I'm the host of Influence, the global podcast that shines a spotlight on the influencer marketing industry. And each episode we talk to brand managers, agency strategists, influencer platforms, industry thought leaders and the influencers themselves about the latest trends and stories affecting the influencer marketing industry. And their stories will certainly inspire you. So just hop over to gordonglenister.com or search for Influence, the global podcast, wherever you normally get your podcast from.
This podcast is coming to you on the MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. There's another show on MPN you might enjoy as well. I'm Matt Bailey, host of The Endless Coffee Cup. In each episode, we talk more about marketing, culture, technology, and our digital lifestyle while having a conversation over coffee. Subscribe to The Endless Coffee Cup. Then pour yourself a cup, sit back, relax, and join the conversation. Just visit sitelogic.com or search for The Endless Coffee Cup wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Lee LeFever.
Story is really, in my view, a way of creating a human connection with the information by following a person in their change in emotion or their change in state based on learning something new versus just click here, go to the next step.
Lee LeFever is the co-founder of Common Craft and the author of 2 books, The Art of Explanation and Big Enough. Since 2007, Common Craft has won numerous awards, worked with respected brands like Lego, Google, Intel, and Ford, and created original explainer videos that have earned over 50 million online video views. Today, Common Craft produces educational guides, ready-made videos, and digital visuals that are used by educators in over 50 countries. Lee and his partner Sachi are Common Craft's only employees and work from their home off the coast of Washington State. Lee, welcome to On Brand.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
I am thrilled to be chatting with you. This is one of those happy moments as a podcaster. We were talking about your work a few episodes back with Michelle Mazur and her 3-word message approach, and she talked about your work in explaining things. And we've talked about a lot of different things, different approaches, but really this focus on explanation, I was fascinated by and dug into your book, specifically The Art of Explanation. Why is the act of explaining, theoretically, when we talk about communicating, should be one of the simplest things? Boy, we get tripped up with explaining. Why is it so hard?
Well, I think that it's something that we take for granted to some degree. I think we explain things every day, and we assume that the way that we explain things is just how we do it, and it's just a built-in part of our communication strategy and not something we can actually improve. One of the first chapters in The Art of Explanation is called Learning to Run, and it's just a little story about someone who takes up running, is not pleased with their results. And then a friend says, you should actually improve your running. You can actually become a better runner and have fewer injuries and go faster and get more out of it. And it was kind of this revelation like, oh, wow, I thought how I run is just how I run. And I think that it's the same with our communication, that we do it so often, we do it so many times a day that we don't often take a step back and think like, oh, is this a skill I can actually improve? Can I actually make this a competitive advantage, for example?
Well, I'm both a runner and a communicator, so I don't I don't know which way to go on this, but we'll stick with communicating. So, like the act of, okay, well, what does it mean to be a better runner? What does it mean to up your explaining skills?
I think it partially means being really in tune with the audience that you're talking to, whether that's a single person or a group, and understanding that most of us have this idea called the curse of knowledge. I have it. We all have it. And the idea behind the curse of knowledge is that the more that you know about something, the harder it is to imagine what it's like not to know. And our knowledge curses us in that way and causes us to sometimes provide examples or use jargon or present information in a way that sounds perfectly good to us, but doesn't really land with our audience because we're cursed, like our knowledge curses us. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that people have to overcome when they start to pursue this idea of being a clearer communicator, is really empathizing with the audience and imagining what it's like to be in their shoes and hearing these words and examples that sound so clear to you. And so part of that is the analysis of what you're saying and thinking about, okay, is this something that my audience is actually going to find familiar and useful versus just using sort of industry jargon that might sound right to you?
So that analysis step that you point to is key, because I would imagine that there are all sorts of people, including probably some listening to this very podcast, who are weighed down by this curse, but may not be aware of it. It's like the first step is knowing you have a problem. So how can you? How can you figure out or self-analyze and learn if you have a problem when it can be sort of deceptive to see sometimes?
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to solve, and I think that when people they're in technical professions, they're surrounded by their peers who also work sort of inside that bubble. It's hard to get out of it. Unfortunately, we can't read minds. We have no indication of what strangers know and don't know. I think for someone preparing for a presentation, for instance, that anytime that you can find someone who is sort of within your target market and to be able just to have a conversation with them about some of the points you're making and what makes sense to them or not as a sort of pre-planning part of the event, then that can be really helpful. And I think also erring on the side of familiar. And I've said that word twice now, and I think it's really important. In explanation, people sometimes think, oh, you're going to dumb it down or you're going to make it simple. And I think that the problem there is that the risk is that you can sound condescending when you do that. You kind of make people feel like that you think you're smarter than them. And so I try to steer people away from this idea of dumb, simple, explain it like a first grader, and think about familiar, because familiar makes it unique to the audience and what they're used to. And I think that that's a more useful way to think about it, is what's familiar to that audience. What are they going to look at and cause their head to nod and say, okay, I got that. And then that sets you up for success, I think.
That's a really good point about familiarity versus dumbing it down. And I think there's also kind of these, the curse of knowledge being one of the initial challenges, but then I feel like our ego also gets in the way, that we feel like we need to kind of credential ourselves and kind of give reminders of our smartness so that we feel worthy to be in the room. It's kind of a complex set of psychological hangups that can really get in the way of that simple explanation of something as well.
It's really true. Something I talk about in the book. Throughout the Art of Explanation, there's this example of a group inside of a company preparing for a presentation and trying to figure out the best way to do it. And I think that what often happens is that there might be a room full of people that are the audience for a presentation, for example, but in a lot of cases, it's really an audience of one, and that might be the most high-ranking person in the room, the person who's going to give the presenter a promotion or a raise or praise or whatever it is. And sometimes, like you're saying, it's complicated. What do I do? Do I really try to make sure and make an earnest attempt to help everyone understand something, or do I really just hit this really hard and really try to impress this manager or boss? which might mean showing the real rigor and depth of their expertise, which maybe doesn't work for everyone in the room. And we've all been in rooms like that. And so I really try to be an advocate for people to say that if your goal is it truly is to make something understandable, then I like to set that tone early and say, okay, guys, some of you may have heard this before, but I think it's important that we all understand it. So I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes building some context, telling you a couple of examples and a couple of stories maybe that just make sure we're all on the same page so that then we can move on. And I like to think if that boss or manager is doing it right, that they're going to say, that was smart. You did the right thing. You didn't have to impress me with your technical expertise because I see that you care about people and understanding and clarity.
You mentioned story in there, and I love in your section on, first of all, the organization of the art of explanation walks you through planning, packaging, presenting. But in packaging, you talk about story. And what I'm intrigued by is you also talk, because everybody's big on story these days. But you actually talk about when does storytelling not work? And I think we talk so much about it. I think understanding some of those limitations might be helpful also. So when does story not work?
The art of explanation is based on years of experience of us making explainer videos. And make the video format is really useful. It's my profession, so I'm a big fan of video, but I know that it's not useful for everything. And I think that some of the story stuff gets mixed up in some of the stuff that's inherently about video too. So an example is if you're giving someone a procedure, a step-by-step list of things to do, maybe there's a role for story there. But also, if it's in the context of a video, then the person taking in that information would have to take notes or try to refer back to the video to be able to write down what are these step-by-step things. And I think story is really, in my view, a way of creating a human connection with the information by following a person in their change in emotion or their change in state based on learning something new versus just click here, go to the next step kind of thing. So I think that that's one of the examples anyway.
On Brand, we'll be right back after this.
Free people. Fashion.
Unique pieces.
Have your own kind of style.
Wear more colorful stuff.
Black t-shirts.
I love creating my own look.
Hip, sexy, vintage.
How do I top that?
It's just like not so cool to look the same all the time.
Leather all the way.
Comfy, casual.
A pair of big old baggy light wash blue jeans.
Creativity, inspiration.
Free people.
Free people.
Free people.
One day in the metaverse, urban planners will model traffic solutions to help decrease commute times. The metaverse may be virtual, but the impact will be real. Learn more at meta.com/metaverseimpact.
Now, back to the show. So you mentioned your explainer videos, and walk us through what one of those is, because it seems like the stats out there on how often we're going to YouTube to have things explained to us. So what is an explainer video, and what makes a good explainer video?
Sure. Well, when we got started in 2007. It was really an answer to all the confusion that was happening around the birth of social media. There were suddenly blogs and wikis and social networking. And we saw this opportunity to take these ideas that were foreign but potentially useful for millions and millions of people and to make them easy to understand for the general public. Like we kind of at the time said people like our parents. And I think that was really it still remains what I believe the best use of explainer videos is to not be focused on sales and really driving a really, feature rich kind of a sales kind of experience, but really speaking at a higher level about context and answering questions like, why do I care? Why should I care about this? Why does this matter? Things that are that higher level understanding. Like, I think people sometimes forget that like explanation is about making something clear. It's about making something understandable. The problem that I see is that in the last 15 years that explainer videos on the web have been a thing, it quickly got co-opted by marketing departments and became a sales tool. And I absolutely think that's useful. There are plenty of great examples of explainer videos that are used in marketing. I just think that there's been a very blurred line between what is sales and what is sort of like pure education in some ways. Both are totally valid. I generally find that with Common Craft and our work, we try to err on the side of education more than a sales experience or commercialized experience.
So if someone is developing a personal brand, I want to phrase this in a non-clumsy way, and I'm afraid I'm going to fail. But do individuals have explanations of who they are as a personal brand?
Well, I'm certain they do to varying degrees. I would say. I think it's a powerful thing. I've always said that being clear about who you are and what you do is an example of being a good explainer. And if you can do that reliably and succinctly and maybe with a bit of pizzazz that brings people in, then that's a competitive advantage. I think that happens in interviews and lots of examples like that. I have written before about, this context of, it's going to be Thanksgiving dinner. You're going to be going, for people in the US anyway, you're going to be going, sitting around a table with family, and people are going to ask, what do you do, Nick? With a little bit of planning, a little bit of thinking about the curse of knowledge, a little bit of thinking about your job, you can actually have a plan for that situation of being asked that question. And so that's the personal connection to thinking about you and your job as one of maybe the first explanations that you work on with a lot of intent, with a goal of saying, all right, I'm actually going to take a step back, look at my job, look at what I do, think about the value I provide. And then when somebody asks that question at Thanksgiving, I'm going to nail it. And they're going to be like, wow, hopefully.
So another thing that you reference is visuals, and as we talk about reinforcing our ideas and educating and explaining, visuals play such a key role. But I feel like we again can really easily get buzzwordy by talking about visual storytelling. But what role do visuals play in explaining?
Yeah, well, I think that they, at probably the most core level, help us remember things. They create a visual element of our memory. There's an idea in sort of cognitive psychology called encoding. And it basically just means like what makes it into your brain, like what makes it into your memories, because a lot of things we see just come and go, but some things get stuck. And there is a theory that this is going to sound a little technical for a discussion about explanation, but it's called dual coding theory. And dual coding theory says that it's this combination of a voice or sounds or information that's being spoken or explained, described in combination with visuals that creates this magic combination of media that increases your ability for information to be encoded into your brain. And so that's, to me, the sort of perhaps scientific basis of it. But I think it just makes it more engaging. I think it makes it, it adds an element of interest and, a quality that brings information to life that audio just can't do.
that I could talk about dual coding theory for the whole podcast. So you've come to the right place. And
Okay.
and speaking of one's own story, I believe dual coding theory comes to us courtesy of Alan Pavio, and whose own story is unique because he's one of the cognitive or bodybuilders turned cognitive psychologists. So Alan Pavio is certainly someone unique that gave us some of the brain science behind why these visuals matter. And what I love saying about that is the old saying of the picture being worth 1,000 words is true, and I feel like that plays a role here in explaining things. And you talk about Dan Rome in the book too, a former guest here on the show, but in mapping out ideas, I love pointing to like Southwest Airlines and drawing out that Southwestern hub on the back of the napkin. And I think sometimes that drawing pictures can break us free of that curse of knowledge too.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. We did some construction recently, and our builder was every time we needed to think about something, he would grab a scrap of wood somewhere and just start drawing things. And it was just second nature to him. He was not practicing some intellectual exercise in visualization. It was just like, I'm going to show you how these things fit together, and it's just a little sketch. And it's like, I wish everybody did that for almost everything.
Yeah. So speaking of sketching things out, when it comes to a brand, I feel like, again, every other episode, I kind of roll my eyes at the labels that we use in brand building, from slogans, taglines, mission statements, brand promises, all these different things. Is there an anchor explanation that a brand should have? It feels like there's some application, that it may not be customer facing language, but something that anchors how you talk about what you do. What is there such a thing? Should we be making such a thing?
I certainly think so. I think the probably the best brands out there are doing that to some degree. I mean, you think of the famous, Nikes and the Apples of the world, but I think even any organization should have what might come down, and might sound trite, but like a tagline that actually captures what they do. The problem is, we did a video for Dropbox years ago, and their product was something that people didn't know existed, didn't know even needed to exist, or how it might even work. And so we worked with them on a video that I like to think became a part of their brand that I hope not only worked on their website when people watching a video, but anybody who worked in the organization could watch the video and then go to that Thanksgiving dinner and use that analogy or use that example. And I think that's a really powerful use of something like this, is if the company or brand can encapsulate this value or this thing that is familiar or sounds familiar to as many people as possible. It's not only something to use in marketing, but that everybody in the company can use as a part of their introduction or evangelism. And sometimes it's not seen that way, but I think that's a powerful use.
I think how you describe that is really key. And I get back to the label stuff, because I feel like a tagline feels such kind of like a passing idea, and they can come and go. And I feel like something like this, like you said, can be something that you grab onto to explain over Thanksgiving dinner. Can be it can certainly, you can build language in marketing campaigns around that, but it's this big idea, this brand explanation, this brandsplanation, which that's I'm not helping. I'm making,
that's my next book, man.
There you go. Run with it. Oh, well, on that note of making each other smile with the idea of brandsplanation, other than your next book, Brandsplanation, is there a brand Lee, that has made you smile recently?
Yeah, that's kind of a funny example, but yeah, just yesterday, we recently got an air purifier for home, and we got it at Costco, and it said on the thing, air purifier with Wi-Fi. And I told my wife, I was like, I cannot wait to get our air purifier online. This is going to be amazing. But it actually turned out that I downloaded the app and connected it. And it really surprised me with how useful it was, because it brought in location information with the air quality outside. And it has a thing that tracks the status of your filters. And like, I was like, okay, this actually, I really like to have an air purifier app on my phone. And I never would have thought that was the case. I thought it was purely marketing, but they did a good job with it. And the brand is Winix. I should probably mention.
Winix?
Yeah, Winix. I don't know that much about it, but that it's an air purifier that you plug into your home, and hopefully it cleans the air.
Very cool. Yeah, again, certainly makes one smile, but also the connected household in this world that we find ourselves in never ceases to amaze me. Lee,
yeah,
where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I would say 2 websites. My company is Common Craft. That's where you can see Common Craft videos. That's commoncraft.com. I've written a couple of books and do a newsletter and things like that. That you can find all of that side of my world at my name, LeeLeFever.com.
All right. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes at onbrandpodcast.com. Lee, thanks for being on brand with us.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Nick. Thanks for having me.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.